Christopher leaned against the cool window pane of his apartment, his fingers trembling as they held the wedding invitation. White envelope, gold print, his name and Rose's name neatly embossed together, just not in the way they used to be. Now it was David and Rose. He had read it a dozen times already, but still, the shock hit him like it was the first time. David and Rose request the honor of your presence. The words blurred as his eyes stung. 3 years. That's how long it had been since they last spoke. Rose was the woman he thought he'd marry, the woman who used to trace shapes on his hand. When they sat in silence, the one who used to call him home. But something broke between them. Or rather, he broke it. And now, she was marrying his old college friend, David, the same guy who had once said he could never imagine dating someone like Rose. The same David who sat next to him at the bar the night she left and said, "Some things aren't meant to last, bro." Christopher tossed the card on the table and sat down on the floor. His phone buzzed. It was Joan, his colleague. "You coming to the meeting? Don't ghost us again." He stared at the screen, then tossed the phone aside. Joan had been trying to pull him out of this fog for months, but Joan didn't know the full story. Nobody did. Not even Rose, maybe. He remembered their last fight so clearly. It wasn't even dramatic. No shouting. No doors slamming. Just quiet, painful disappointment. "You always disappear when it matters, Chris," she'd said, sitting on the edge of their bed. "I needed you when my dad got sick, when I lost my job, and you just shut off." "I didn't know how to help," he'd mumbled. "You didn't even try." That was the end. She left their apartment a week later. He thought she'd come back, but she didn't. Instead, she rebuilt her life. And apparently she rebuilt it with David. He picked up the wedding invitation again. There was a photo inside. Rose looked radiant, happy. And David stood beside her, the proud man who had picked up the pieces Christopher left behind. What was he supposed to do with this? Go to the wedding? Applaud their vows? Pretend he hadn't thought of Rose every night since she left? The apartment felt smaller with each breath. He needed air. He grabbed his coat and walked out into the city, his legs moving without direction. The streets were full of couples holding hands, kids laughing, music from street performers. The world was fine. He wasn't. His feet eventually brought him to the old bookstore where he and Rose used to spend lazy Sundays. The owner, Mr. Lee, gave him a nod, but didn't say much. Christopher wandered to the poetry section. She loved poetry. She used to read to him aloud from books he never cared about until she made him care. His fingers stopped at a familiar title, "The Silent Things We Do." He remembered buying it for her on her birthday. She cried when he wrote a note inside. He opened it. The page was still there. "To Rose, for the words we never say, but always feel." See, he didn't buy the book, just stood there holding it, like maybe the memories could bring her back. He left the store empty-handed. His phone buzzed again. "Joan, are you okay? Wanna grab coffee?" He almost replied, almost, but instead, he turned the phone off, walked home, sat back on the floor, then quietly, he picked up the wedding card one last time. He flipped it over. No RSVP, just an address for replies, a return envelope. He took out a blank sheet of paper, wrote nothing, slipped it into the envelope. Silence was all he had left to say. 3 days passed. Christopher didn't leave the apartment. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and the silence he had sent back sat heavier than he expected. He thought maybe it would feel like closure, like power. Instead, it just echoed. Joan showed up at his door uninvited. She knocked like she had a right to be there, and when he didn't answer, she kept knocking until he gave in. He opened the door slowly. She looked him up and down. "You look like you haven't eaten in days," she said. "That true?" He gave her a half shrug, stepping aside to let her in. She didn't wait for permission. Joan walked in, dropped her bag on the couch, and marched to the kitchen. She returned minutes later with 2 bowls of microwave noodles. "Eat, then talk." He didn't speak for a while, just ate. She didn't push. That was the thing about Joan, she could sit in silence better than anyone he knew. After a while he said, "She sent me her wedding card." Joan didn't flinch. "Yeah, I figured something was up." I didn't reply. Just sent back an empty envelope. Joan chewed for a moment, then set her bowl down. "That's dramatic, but honestly, kinda fair." He looked at her. "Fair? You weren't ready for her then? Doesn't mean she gets to poke at your wounds now. Weddings are for people who've moved on. You clearly haven't." "I wanted to," he said, the words falling out of him like loose bricks. I tried, but everything reminds me of her. Even you sometimes. Joan raised an eyebrow. Me? You're blunt. She was like that too, but kinder. Joan smirked. Gee, thanks. He put his bowl down. Why him, Joan? Why David? Of all people? Joan leaned back, crossing her arms. Maybe because David shows up. Maybe because he saw something broken and wanted to fix it. That's what some people do, Chris. They step in where others back out. That stung. He rubbed his face. I didn't know how to handle her pain. Her dad dying. Her career falling apart. I thought giving her space was helping. Space is what you give to strangers, Joan said gently. Not to the person you love. That sentence hung between them, like truth wrapped in barbed wire. Christopher sighed. Do you think she still thinks of me? Joan tilted her head. You really want to know the answer to that? He nodded. She probably does, but not the way you want her to. She's not thinking about the late night talks or the bookstore visits. She's thinking about how you disappeared when she needed you the most. That's what sticks. Christopher didn't respond. He couldn't. Joan stood up and grabbed her coat. Listen, you can keep sitting here, swimming in ghosts, or you can get some damn closure. Talk to her. Show up if you must. But don't lie to yourself and pretend silence will fix what words never did. She left him there, surrounded by silence. Again, but this time, it didn't feel like armor. It felt like chains. That night, Christopher opened his laptop. He didn't go to social media. He couldn't bear to see wedding updates. Instead, he opened an old email draft, one he'd written to Rose a year ago but never sent. It said only two things. I'm sorry I left when it mattered. I never stopped loving you. He hovered over the send button, but in the end, he closed it again. Maybe it was too late. Maybe some apologies arrive at the door just as it's being closed forever. The next morning, the city felt different. Maybe it was just the sky gray, overcast, heavy with the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're holding your breath. Christopher walked to work for the first time in weeks, headphones in, music off, just noise to block out the world. The corner coffee shop. Joan was already there. She didn't wave him over. She just nodded, like she knew he'd show up eventually. He sat across from her, both pretending it wasn't awkward. I didn't send the email, he said after a moment. Joan stirred her drink. Didn't think you would. Why not? Because you don't want forgiveness. You want a second chance, and you don't get both. He flinched at that. She wasn't wrong. They sipped their coffee in silence for a bit before she asked, You going to the wedding? Christopher stared out the window. I don't know. I don't even know if I can look at her without falling apart. You'll fall apart either way. At least do it where she can see it. He looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly. That's a bit cruel. Truth usually is. Joan wasn't trying to be cold. He knew that. She was trying to shake something loose in him, and maybe she was succeeding. That evening, Christopher opened the box under his bed. The one with all the pieces of Rose he had refused to let go of, photos, notes, her hairbrush, an old hoodie she used to sleep in, and at the bottom, folded neatly, was the letter she left the day she moved out. He hadn't read it in years. He unfolded it slowly. Chris, you'll probably hate me for walking away. Maybe you already do, but I can't keep waiting for the version of you who cares out loud. You love quietly, and I bleed loudly. That's the problem. I didn't need you to fix anything. I just needed to not feel alone in the room with you. If you ever figure out how to show up for someone, maybe we'll find each other again. Or maybe not. Just know I wanted forever with you. You didn't have to be perfect. You just had to stay. Ree's hands trembled. He read it twice, then 3 more times. Every word was a slap to the chest. Every line was something he should have seen back then but was too afraid to face. He reached for his phone. No social media, just a search. One name, David Langston. The wedding was being held at a vineyard outside the city. Invitations only, small, intimate, private. He closed the tab, then he reopened it. There was a part of him that wanted to go, not to ruin anything, not to make a scene, but just to see her one last time. To know that she was real, that her smile wasn't just a memory, and that he could say goodbye without a letter, without silence, and maybe, somewhere deep inside, a selfish part of him hoped she'd look at him and hesitate, even for a second. Later, that night, Joan texted him, If you need a ride to the wedding, I'll be outside at 10 a.m. Don't make me wait. He stared at the message, heart thudding. He didn't reply, but he set his alarm. Morning came with the kind of quiet that wrapped around everything. Christopher got dressed without thinking, like muscle memory had taken over. A white shirt, dark blazer, no tie. He stared at himself in the mirror for a long time. He looked older, tired. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. ATM sharp. Joan's car pulled up outside his apartment. She didn't honk, didn't call, just waited, engine running. When he opened the door, she gave him a once-over and nodded. No, Ty, she said. You're serious. I'm not crashing the wedding, he mumbled. Just going to see. That's it. Sure, she said, pulling away from the curb. Just like people go to funerals just to be respectful. The drive was long, mostly quiet. The road stretched out into the countryside, and the trees grew taller the further they drove. Joan finally broke the silence. Do you love her, Chris? Still? He didn't answer right away. I don't think I ever stopped. Joan glanced at him. Then tell her, even if it changes nothing. He looked out the window. What if it makes things worse? What's worse than spending the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd said something? He didn't reply. He couldn't. They arrived at the vineyard just before noon. The place looked like something out of a dream. Lush green hills, rows of grapes, white chairs lined in perfect symmetry under strings of golden lights. Guests were already seated. The ceremony hadn't started yet. Joan parked far from the crowd, near a gravel road where no one would notice them. She turned off the engine and looked at him. All right, Romeo. What now? He got out of the car slowly, heart pounding. I just want to see her, that's all. You sure? No, he said honestly. He walked up the small hill, staying far enough back to remain unseen. From his spot, he could see the altar, the guests, the flowers, the little white archway where she'd stand. Then he saw her. Rose stepped out from the main house, holding a bouquet, her dress simple and beautiful, her hair up in a soft twist. She looked like a memory he'd never earned. For a second, everything stopped. She smiled at something someone said, probably a bridesmaid, and that smile was exactly the same. It hit him like a wave, that moment when you realize nothing you do will ever be enough to change the past. He turned to leave, but then she turned too, and her eyes landed on him. She froze. It was just a second, just a flicker, but he saw it: recognition, disbelief, something like hurt. Then it was gone. Someone touched her shoulder, guiding her forward. Christopher took a step back, heart in his throat. He shouldn't have come. Behind him, Joan appeared. She saw you, didn't she? He nodded. Joan crossed her arms. You gonna stand here like a coward, or you gonna talk to her before she says I do? He opened his mouth, then closed it. She added, if you walk away now, don't come crying to me later. This is your moment, Chris. Whether she loves you or not, you owe it to both of you to finish the conversation that never got finished. He stared down at the wedding scene again. The music had started. People were rising. And Rose, she was walking down the aisle. Everything inside him screamed to run, to disappear, to let it go. But his feet didn't move, because somewhere inside, the old version of him, the one who used to run, was being dragged out of hiding. And for the first time in years, he didn't want to vanish. He wanted to speak. The music played softly as Rose took each step down the aisle. The sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden shadows across the white chairs and smiling faces. Christopher stood at the edge of the vineyard, hidden just behind a row of tall hedges, watching her walk toward a man who wasn't him. David stood at the altar, nervous but smiling, the way someone does when they believe everything is finally falling into place. Christopher could hear faint murmurs from the guests, someone laughing softly, a camera shutter clicking, but all of it blurred around the image of her, Rose, beautiful and poised, like a painting he couldn't stop staring at. He felt the panic creeping in, cold and suffocating. This was a mistake. What was he even doing here? There were no words big enough to fix 3 years of silence. No apology good enough to rewind time. He almost turned to leave again, but then, her eyes lifted. Right before she reached David, she looked up and locked eyes with him. It wasn't an accident. She saw him. She really saw him. Her steps faltered, only slightly. A brief pause, enough for someone who knew her to notice. David didn't. He just reached for her hand, ready to begin, but Rose didn't take it. Not yet. Instead, she handed her bouquet to her sister and whispered something to the officiant. Everyone looked confused. A wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. Christopher's heart nearly stopped as she turned and walked away from the altar, right toward him. He froze, couldn't move, could barely breathe. She walked through the grass like she'd rehearsed this scene 1,000 times in her head. When she reached him, they were alone, hidden from the guests, just like they always used to be when things got too loud. Her voice was quiet. "You came." He nodded, unsure if he could speak. "You didn't RSVP," she added, like she needed to say something, anything just to fill the space. He looked at her, voice raw. "I thought silence was the only thing I had left." A pause. The kind that held every word they'd never said. "I thought I was past this," she said softly. "Past you. But then I saw you. And I don't expect anything," he interrupted. "Not forgiveness. Not answers. I needed to see you. One last time." She looked down, her voice trembling. "I waited for you, for months. I kept hoping you'd say something. Show up. Be the version of you I knew was buried under all that fear. I was a coward," he said, "and I paid for it every day since." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "So why now, Chris? Why today?" He took a deep breath. "Because it was supposed to be me, and I can't let you marry someone else without saying what I should have screamed years ago." She stared at him. "And what's that?" "That I love you," he said, his voice cracking. Still, always, silence. Then Rose looked over her shoulder, toward the altar, where David stood frozen, confused. The guests had begun to murmur louder now. This wasn't just a delay, it was a disruption. She turned back to Christopher, and he saw the war behind her eyes. "You can't say that now and expect it to change everything," she said, voice tight. "You don't get to show up today and rewrite the story." "I know," he whispered, "but I couldn't stay silent. Not again." She looked away for a moment, tears finally spilling. "You broke me, Chris. I broke me too." She took a shaky breath. "I don't know what to do with this. With you." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the old email he never sent. He handed it to her. She hesitated, then took it, unfolded it, read it silently. When she finished, she looked up. The pain was still there, but so was something else. "I need time," she whispered. He nodded. "Take all of it." And with that, she turned and walked slowly back toward the altar. Not running, not rushing, just walking. She wasn't ready to leave David. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she hadn't said goodbye either, and that, somehow, felt like the first breath of something not broken. The ceremony didn't finish, not in the way anyone expected. Rose returned to the altar, her face calm, composed, but her hands shook. David looked at her, searching her face for answers, but she avoided his eyes. The guests grew restless. Someone cleared their throat. The officiant looked unsure whether to proceed. "I'm sorry," Rose said, her voice steady but quiet enough that only the first few rows heard. "I need a moment with the groom." David followed her behind the archway, out of earshot, where the vines climbed up the wall in thick green curls. Christopher couldn't see them anymore, but he imagined every second like a knife carving through him. Rose looked up at David, her heart hammering in her chest. He showed up. David didn't have to ask who. "I saw him," he said quietly. She nodded. "I didn't expect it. I didn't think he had the guts." David let out a short breath. "So now what?" She looked him in the eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to say. "You've been good to me, better than I deserved, maybe. But if I marry you right now," with him standing there, "I'd always wonder." David stiffened. "Wonder if what? If he still loves you? If you still love him?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. David stepped back, hurt flickering through his eyes. "You told me you were done with him, Rose. You told me that was finished." "I thought I was," she whispered. "I really thought I was." A long silence stretched between them. Then David nodded slowly. "You're not the first woman I've loved who loves someone else more." Tears filled her eyes. "I don't want to hurt you. You just did," he said with a tired smile. "But thank you for not pretending at the altar." She reached for his hand, but he stepped back, not angry, just finished. They didn't walk back to the guests together. Instead, David took a different path through the side garden, vanishing into the vineyard. The officiant made an announcement. Some people groaned, some whispered, some left. The ceremony was called off. Christopher was still standing by the hedges. When Rose returned, her steps were slower now, less certain. Her dress, once pristine, was now caught with bits of leaves and grass at the hem. She stopped a few feet from him, I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she said, her voice so soft he had to lean closer to hear. I almost didn't come, but you did. Yeah, he said. And I'm not here to ask you to end your life. I just needed to say the words that kept me up every night. She watched him for a long time, the kind of stare that reaches into old memories. Do you know how many nights I waited for those words? He swallowed hard. I do now. I used to lie awake imagining what I'd say to you if you ever showed up again. Sometimes I was angry. Sometimes I forgave you. Sometimes I just wanted you to explain why you stopped fighting for me. I thought giving you space was love, he said quietly, but space just turned into absence, and then absence turned into silence, and I didn't know how to come back from that. She nodded. You disappeared. I disappeared because I thought I wasn't good enough. And your pain, it was big, Rose. Bigger than me. I got scared. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked around the broken altar, the empty aisle, the guests slowly drifting away like the closing scene of a forgotten movie. I don't know what happens now, she said. I'm not asking for a decision today, he replied. I just want to be allowed to try, to stay, for real this time. She looked at him with a kind of sadness that only comes from love that had to grow in silence. Then stay. It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a goodbye either, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to begin something again. They didn't go back to the city right away. Rose asked him to stay for a while. Not at my place, she clarified. There's a small inn down the road. I can't go from wedding dress to second chances in an afternoon, Christopher agreed without hesitation. He needed time to remember how to be around her without choking on old guilt. Time to just exist in her space again, quietly, respectfully. That first night, he sat alone on the inn's balcony, listening to the vineyard wind cut through the trees. Below, the world looked peaceful. Above, the stars were silent witnesses. He didn't expect a knock at his door past midnight, but there it was, soft, hesitant. When he opened it, Rose stood there, hair loose now, makeup wiped clean, barefoot, wrapped in a hoodie that looked 2 sizes too big. His hoodie, from years ago. I couldn't sleep, she said. He stepped aside. She came in and sat at the edge of the bed, folding her legs underneath her like she used to. You okay? He asked carefully. She nodded. I think I will be. I don't regret stopping the wedding. He sat across from her on a worn wooden chair, hands resting on his knees. I'm sorry you even had to make that decision. She smiled a little, sad and tired. David is a good man, but he never made me feel uncertain. And that should have been a sign. Christopher raised a brow. Most people would say certainty is the goal. Yeah, but you made me feel everything. Terrified, alive, seen. When you left, it felt like losing a limb. He looked down. I didn't know how to love you out loud. That's my biggest shame. Do you now? She asked, voice softer than before. I think I'm learning. I think love is in the showing up, in saying the scary things, in staying even when it's hard. Rose nodded slowly. And do you still see me? The me that's changed, grown, maybe hardened. I see you, he said, standing, walking toward her. And I still think you're the most complicated, beautiful person I've ever met. She looked up at him, eyes glistening but steady. You're not who you used to be either. I hope not. They sat in silence for a few minutes, just breathing together. Then she stood, walked toward him, stopped only inches away. I don't want a perfect version of you, she whispered. I just want the one who stays. I'm staying, he said, as long as you'll let me. She leaned in then, forehead touching his chest, her hands gripping the sides of his shirt. He wrapped his arms around her gently, like he was afraid she'd disappear again. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Some wounds needed warmth before they could welcome fire. That night, she didn't go back to her room. They fell asleep on opposite sides of the bed, not touching, but closer than they'd been in years. And in the dark, before sleep took her, Rose whispered, I still love you too. He didn't say anything back, but his hand reached out, found hers, and held on tight. Morning arrived slowly, slipping through the curtains like it knew not to rush anything. Rose woke first. Christopher was still asleep, turned toward her, one arm tucked beneath his head, the other stretched toward the space where their fingers had met during the night. She watched him for a moment, really watched him, not the man she remembered, but the man he'd become. A little older, a little softer, worn down in the right places. Not perfect, not healed completely, but real. She got up quietly and went to the balcony, letting the morning air wrap around her. Below, the vineyard stretched out under the golden sky. It was strange how something so beautiful could hold memories of something falling apart. A few minutes later, he joined her. Barefoot, hair a mess, shirt wrinkled. She glanced at him and smiled. "You look like hell," he grinned. "Thanks. You make it sound romantic." They stood in silence, the way people do when they've finally run out of excuses and lies. "I have to talk to David," she said, not looking at him. Face to face. "Yeah," Christopher replied. "You owe him that. And after?" He hesitated. "That's not up to me." She turned to him. "But if it were?" He took a deep breath. "Then I'd want to come home with you. Not to fix everything all at once. Just to start again. New keys, new place, new version of us. No ghosts." Her eyes softened. "You think it's possible?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I'd rather fail trying than keep living." Inside silence. She stepped closer. "I'm scared, Chris." "So am I," he admitted. "But this time, I won't leave you to face it alone." She rested her head against his shoulder. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a dream or a memory. It felt real. Now, later that day, she met with David. Christopher didn't go. He waited at a coffee shop till town's over, nursing a cup that went cold while the hours slipped by. When she finally arrived, her expression said everything. "It's over," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He just said he hoped I'd find what I'd been looking for. Christopher nodded. "He's a good man. Too good for someone still haunted by another name." He didn't ask her if she was sure. She had never looked more certain. They left the vineyard that evening, driving back to the city in Joan's car. She didn't say much, just played music quietly and smiled to herself like she knew she'd be right all along. Back at Christopher's apartment, Rose sat on his old couch, looking around at the pieces of his life. She picked up a photo of them from years ago, dusty, buried behind newer things but still there. "We're not those people anymore," she said. "No," he agreed. "But we can be better." That night, they finally kissed. Not desperate, not full of fire, just quiet, aching warmth, like a thank you, like a welcome home. Weeks passed, then months. They moved into a new apartment with white walls and empty frames, choosing what to keep, what to leave behind. They argued, they made up, they learned how to talk again, how to show up in the small, important ways. One morning, she woke up to find a note on the kitchen counter. No more silence, no more disappearing, just this. "Every day, you're C," and she smiled, because for the first time in a long time, forever didn't feel like a lie. It felt possible. It felt earned.